And stand by for Stephen Lee.
BBC Radio Norfolk, the talk of the county.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Friday, April the 4th, and this is Stephen Lee welcoming you to Today in Norfolk. Between now and 9 with the latest news, sports, weather and travel. This morning's headlines: armed and hooded raiders attack a Norfolk man in his home and steal jewellery and cash. Motorists heading towards the West Midlands face more traffic chaos today. And the weather headline: mostly dry and bright, but feeling cool. Well, coming up in the programme today are the days of the video shop on the Norfolk street corner gone, how a local firm is throwing a net around bad debtors and fraudsters, and the future of shopping in Kings Lynn is revealed. But first, the news in detail, read today by Ian Himes.
Good morning. A Norfolk man is in hospital after being attacked in an armed raid on his home. Two masked men armed with a gun raided the house at Lodge Farm, Dereham Road at Cossey, on the outskirts of Norwich at 10 o'clock last night. He was beaten up in front of his family and cash and jewellery was stolen, as we heard from Inspector Carol Congreve.
The owner of the property was attacked by two men who entered the premises wearing balaclavas, and they were armed with a gun. They attacked him and demanded that he hand over money and jewellery from the premises.
The inspector said it was a particularly vicious attack.
Yes, it was. The man was beaten quite severely and has face and chest injuries.
Motorists in the West Midlands face more chaos after police confirmed that stretches of the M5 and M6 motorways, shut after yesterday's bomb alerts, are to remain closed until after the morning rush hour. The closure affects the M6 between junctions 7 and 10 and the M5 from junction 1 to the M6 link. Anti-terrorist officers have been searching for more devices overnight. 2 bombs were found yesterday. The Assistant Chief Constable in the West Midlands, Bob Packham, said the attack was cowardly.
Words fail me in terms of the disruptions of life, the potential loss of life with not only the local people living there, working there, people driving along the motorway. It could have been horrendous.
Angry residents of Norwich's northern suburbs say they're fed up with the odour of aviation fuel and nighttime aircraft noise. Local people aired their grievances with environmental agencies and with Broads, that's the Broadland residents opposed to airport disturbances. Naomi Balcombe, the spokesperson for Broads, claims that Norwich Airport just isn't observing long-standing airport regulations.
We are not opposed to Norwich Airport. We recognise its economic importance. We would simply like it to abide by the planning regulations which we believe were set in place in 1986.
Caister Lifeboat has been launched to help a yacht which has run into difficulties. The 33-foot yacht Anna Matilda, with 3 people on board, was heading towards Hull when it had to tackle strong winds. The yacht, which was just 4 miles off the coast, is now making for Great Yarmouth. Coxswain of the Caister Lifeboat, Dick Thurlow, said the crew couldn't cope with the 4-6 gale.
They've had a bit of a bashing all night and they're very tired and I think one or two are suffering a bit from seasickness and it's better to be safe than sorry. Get them back to Great Yarmouth so they can get some rest. They're very tired but very, very pleased to see us.
2 missing Kings Lynn schoolgirls have turned up safe and well. The 14-year-old friends, Nicola Brewer and Claire Hastings, disappeared on Wednesday, but the police say the girls have now returned home. Labour's Robin Cook has launched the party's manifesto in Norwich with a promise that the party's leaders wouldn't make pledges they couldn't keep. Mr Cook said there would be improvements to the education service financed by a windfall tax on the privatised utilities like Anglian Water and Eastern Electricity. But he said Labour had no plans to abolish the school league tables brought in by the Tories.
We believe that there should be adequate information available to the public on the performance of schools, and yes, we'll make sure that that information is available to the public. There may be ways in which one can look at refining it to make it fairer, to make it more reasonable, but it's very important that parents and public have access to information about how schools are performing.
The Education Secretary and South West Norfolk MP, Gillian Shepherd, will address the NAS UWT conference this morning. It's the first full airing of the Conservative Party's education plans since it launched its general election manifesto. And the Liberal Democrats will publish their manifesto today. At its core will be education, with a promise to put a penny on income tax to pay for extra spending on school books and equipment. A Norwich man has been ordered to be electronically tagged for 4.5 months by a judge at Norwich Crown Court. 28-year-old Stephen Mullen admitted to smuggling cannabis resin into Norwich Prison. Rachel Matthews reports.
Mullen of Drayton Road in the city admitted possessing the drug with intent to supply and also to possessing a small amount of cannabis in August last year. Prosecuting Stephen Ridley told the court how Mullen went to visit a friend at Norwich Jail, was searched by a prison officer and was seen trying to secrete something in his mouth. It was found to be a quantity of cannabis resin. When interviewed by police, Mullen said he had taken in the drug on his own initiative for his friend to use as a form of currency. Michael Clare, defending, said it was a one-off offence committed by a normally hard-working young man. Under the tagging order, Mullen is confined to his home for at least 8 hours a day to coincide with his shift work at a double glazing firm. He was also ordered to do 100 hours of community service.
The Institute of Chartered Accountants has given a warning about the problems many people will face under the new system in which they will assess their own income tax. Tax return forms are being sent out to almost 9 million people on Monday, the first working day of the new financial year. More now from Anthony Brown.
Government introduced tax self-assessment in a bid to streamline the inland revenue. It's sending tax return forms to anyone with even slightly complex tax affairs, including higher rate taxpayers, the self-employed and those with income from property. Although the forms have won plaudits for their plain English, the Institute of Chartered Accountants says they'll cause widespread confusion. There are penalties for badly kept records, forms filled in wrongly and forms handed in late. But there is particular concern about the Inland Revenue's new powers of investigation. Tax inspectors can comb through the financial affairs of someone without giving any reason, which the Institute says is confrontational and unfair.
The Department of Health has accepted defeat in one of Britain's longest-running sex discrimination cases. It's conceded that a speech therapist was discriminated against when she was paid less than male workers in comparable professions 11 years ago. The MSF union is now planning to pursue 1,500 similar cases, seeking millions of pounds in back pay. Plans to appoint a new manager to run the Pavilion Theatre in Crowborough have been agreed upon by council officials. The decision follows the sudden departure of the former manager, Nigel Stewart, who resigned days before the start of the spring and summer season. He says he left the job for personal reasons and will now change direction. The Chief Executive of North Norfolk Council, Bruce Barrell, believes at this time it will be a full-time employee of the council.
Well, we believe that the theatre, A, has a good international reputation, and B, plays a very important part in the local economy from a tourism support point of view, and it's important that we keep it going and retain the reputation.
Bruce Barrell, the Chief Executive of North Norfolk Council. Well, that's the BBC Radio Norfolk News. It's 7:08. There's a news summary at 7:30.
Ian Himes at the news desk this morning. For the weather forecast, we cross to our studios at the Norwich Weather Centre. We're joined this morning by Shelley Robinson.
Good morning. Well, we're certainly getting off to a chilly start. There was quite a widespread ground frost during last night. The temperatures will be rather slow to recover during this morning, and in fact still be on the cool side this afternoon, with a maximum temperature of around 10 or 11 degrees Celsius at best. Fortunately, the winds aren't as strong as they were yesterday, but still blowing from a northwesterly direction. There'll be a moderate breeze during this morning, but they will ease to a much lighter southwesterly during the course of this afternoon. The best of the sunshine is going to be during this morning, but we've still got some patchy cloud drifting in from the North Sea. That may just bring an isolated light shower into the northeast of the county, particularly to the northeast of Norwich for a time this morning, but for the bulk of the day it is going to stay dry. As I say, the best of the sunshine will be during this morning, but we will see some high cloud drifting down from the north, turning the sunshine rather hazy by the end of the morning, and then gradually some thickening layers of cloud will be spreading across during the course of the afternoon, so it probably will be quite a cloudy end to the day, particularly across at Kings Lynn and Downham Market.
That cloud will be thick enough to bring some patchy light rain here and there through the course of the evening, and then for tonight I think it will be staying largely dry, some breaks developing in the cloud, but it will be a much milder night than last night, the lowest temperatures around 6 or 7 degrees Celsius, and it will be a breezy night, the southwesterly winds picking up to become quite fresh and blustery. Looking ahead to tomorrow, well, it will be a very windy day, some quite strong westerly winds in store, a fair amount of cloud around, and that may just bring an odd spot of rain later on in the day. Perhaps a ground frost then at the end of Saturday night as winds ease and that rain clears away, and then Sunday at the moment looks as if it should be a much quieter day, dry with some sunshine, but a little bit on the cool side. And now the coastal forecast for the Wash to Great Yarmouth until 7 a.m. tomorrow. The wind northwesterly force 4 or 5, decreasing force 3 or 4 by midday, and southwesterly force 3 by evening. During the evening, winds will increase southwesterly force 5 or 6 with little change overnight. Visibility good but moderate at times tonight. The sea state moderate to rough, decreasing slight to moderate by midday and slight during the afternoon, and then the seas will increase moderate over open waters tonight. And the outlook for the following 24 hours, west-southwest force 6 winds, perhaps reaching force 7 at times, decreasing northerly force 4 overnight, moderate or good visibility, and moderate or rough seas slowly decreasing overnight. And that's the end of the forecast.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
Welcome along to the programme. Stephen Lee with you between now and 9 o'clock. Lots to pack in today. But coming up in the next few minutes, why Robin Cook didn't meet any chickens on a visit to Norfolk. And as most people get out from under their quilts, we slip under a rather special one. But first this morning, a West Norfolk inquest has heard how a Heacham man's fears that he may have cancer could have led to both his wife being killed and his own suicide. Their bodies were found in separate rooms of their bungalow in Heacham in January. Julian Sturdy was at the inquest. He told Jill Bennett about the evidence he found at the scene.
Well, it was actually the daughter of the couple, Bill and Mary Veazey. This is Claire Dix. She had called round to see her parents at their home in Norse Drive in Heacham back in January. Now, normally she would knock on the door and they'd let her in, but there was no reply, so she actually used her own key to get inside the bungalow. And it was inside the bungalow that she found the body of her mother lying in the lounge. Now, there was sign of a struggle. There was some smashed glass in the hall, there was a bent door handle, and there was some blood. Now, her initial impression was that someone had broken in and had killed her mother, although there was no sign of her father. Now, Claire Dix had then called her boyfriend's mother, and she and Claire's boyfriend had arrived, and he had found Mr. Veazey hanging in the conservatory after a search of the bungalow.
So, originally it was treated as a murder inquiry?
Yes, the police had to do that. They knew it was a suspicious death. The police carried out a full forensic investigation. They cordoned off the bungalow and called in the pathologist, but they soon established that there'd been no sign of a forced entry. Now, the only blood in the house was that of Mr. Veazey. The smashed glass had been smashed outwards, so there was no evidence of a third party. Now, Mr. Veazey's face had scratches on it, and his wife had blood in her fingernails, and the pathologist had concluded that this had been caused by Mrs. Veazey trying to stop herself from being strangled.
What was the finding from the post-mortems?
Well, the inquests were actually treated separately, although obviously they were linked. Now, in the case of Mr. Veazey, his death was found to be consistent with hanging. Now, the time that the pathologist concluded he had died was after the death of Mrs. Veazey. Now, she had died from a lack of blood, which was due to strangulation.
What evidence was given about Mr. Veazey's health?
Well, he'd actually been very worried about his health. He'd been to the doctor several times, although he was reluctant to do so, and he'd also been reluctant to seek specialist advice from the hospital. Now, he'd become fixated by a problem he had, and he was worried that, in fact, he had cancer, and he was also worried about his deteriorating sight. Now, he'd shortly, a few weeks before his death, he'd been in hospital for about 9 days, and it was in hospital that he'd had a test for cancer. Now, he'd been assured by his doctor that the most likely cause was a different disease of the bowel, but nevertheless he'd been very worried about it and very depressed, and had told his family that he was very worried about his wife and how his wife would be able to actually cope without him. Now, he was due to hear the result of the test now a week after this on January the 28th. Now, the tragic thing about it is that the test was actually clear for cancer, and in fact he did have the bowel disease that his doctor had suspected.
So what did the coroner conclude?
He made a comment about the time it had taken for the test of the cancer result to come through. He said that to him, a 2-week wait for something as serious as cancer was a long time. However, he was satisfied in this case that Mr. Veazey had taken his own life. He said he'd been fearful about that he'd had cancer of the bowel, and he'd got himself into a very sad state. So he recorded a verdict of suicide on Mr. Veazey, and in the case of Mrs. Veazey, he said that she had been unlawfully killed.
So can we assume from that Mr. Veazey killed his wife?
The coroner didn't say so. He was at pains to point out that it wasn't his job to name the killer. However, the family and indeed the police are satisfied that there was no third party involved, and say they went to a great lengths to ensure that there was nobody else in the house. And yes, that is the only conclusion that was drawn from the inquest.
Julian Sturdier reporting there on yesterday's inquest into the deaths of an elderly Heacham couple. The time now is exactly 7:15. You're listening to Today in Norfolk with Stephen Lee. Now, if you've had a chance to read your newspapers this morning, or indeed watched any television programme, or even listened to the radio, you'll kind of failed to notice everything in the news about the Labour manifesto, which was launched yesterday. Now, as Tony Blair was telling the national press about Labour's election manifesto, his Foreign Affairs spokesman Robin Cook was heading to Norwich for the regional launch. He was clearly feeling cheerful about being out on the campaign trail, as Jill Bennett reports.
There were red balloons, party workers from all over the region, and 2 notable defectors to Labour to provide the setting for the manifesto launch at Norwich Labour Club. And Robin Cook had an upbeat message for the party's prospective candidates and their supporters, and he was clearly enjoying being out on the stump.
You have no idea how wonderful it is to get away from Westminster and from Parliament. Indeed, a general election is very demanding, but it is an awful lot better than sitting on the House of Commons and opposition benches looking at over 300 Tory MPs. And the opportunity of coming up the country is that it gives me a chance to exchange views with the public, with the electorate. And sometimes you hear an awful lot more common sense spoken by them than you hear in the House of Commons.
Mr. Blair's new Labour was the subject of much enthusiasm from the 2 recent converts. Ted Shelton, once the Conservative leader of Breckland Council, and Chief Whip Richard Ryder's agent.
I think the Labour Party have got an exceptionally good chance, the best chance they've had in several decades. I've been very disappointed. One of the reasons I changed from being Conservative to Labour was I was quite appalled at John Major's leadership. You didn't know what policy the party were pursuing from week to week. They spend more time fighting themselves than they did the opposition. I found out during my spell as leader on Breckland, and also working with Richard Ryder as his agent, that they actually stopped listening to what the grassroots were saying to them, and they got more and more remote and completely out of touch.
There was Christopher Brocklebank Fowler, once a rising Tory star, then a Social Democrat, then a Liberal Democrat. Now, he said, the country's best bet was Tony Blair.
I'm not a professional politician anymore, but I'm a person that cares deeply about the future of our country, and I'm concerned that it should both improve the quality of its parliament, improve the constitution, improve its relationship with the public. I think that Parliament has fallen into disrepute, and it is only constitutional change which will enable the public's views more accurately to be reflected in Parliament and in the decision-making of the nation. And I think the Labour Party offers the prospect of a reforming government which will benefit the people as a whole.
Robin Cook came to Radio Norfolk later in the afternoon to talk about the plans outlined in the Labour manifesto: improvements to schools, more nurses in the NHS, the abolition of nursery vouchers and a guarantee of a nursery place for all 4-year-olds. Easy enough to talk about improving services, but what about the thornier subject of Europe? How would he want Britain to approach its presidency of the EU?
Well, we have already set our objectives of the British presidency. It's quite interesting that the Conservative manifesto does not say anything about what they would do with the British presidency of Europe, although it's a key opportunity for Britain to restore itself to a leading role in Europe instead of being on the sidelines.
But many people will say you'll just capitulate left, right and centre.
No. Being a leading force doesn't mean that you're capitulating. Being a leading force means that you actually are setting the agenda and getting the reforms that Europe needs, for instance, on the agricultural policy, on fraud, on the single market, removing the barriers to trade in Europe. There's still too many obstacles in the way of British industry succeeding in the continent. We're determined to get those obstacles removed.
So then it was time to be off to Edinburgh and home territory. The parting shot was that when he was first elected, Norwich had 2 Labour MPs. Robin Cook's hoping that the city will have 2 again after May the 1st.
That report on the Labour manifesto launch was by Jill Bennett. Well, as you'd expect, Labour's manifesto is analysed in minute detail in the newspapers this morning. Several of the papers note that nowhere in the document is the term socialism mentioned. The Independent describes the manifesto as an obituary, a death notice for the old Labour Party. The Guardian believes Labour's manifesto is progressive and bold. According to the Mirror, Tony Blair is offering hope, justice and fairness. However, others are more sceptical. The Daily Telegraph is one of several papers to highlight the Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown's admission that he needs to find £1.5 billion of new revenue to finance his spending plans for the years 1998 to 9. The views of the criminologist Mike Presty receive widespread coverage. He's issued a warning about television shows such as Gladiators and Blind Date, saying they're sending children a message that real-life violence and humiliation is acceptable. According to The Sun, Mr. Presty believes that such programmes are more worrying than the cult horror film Pulp Fiction. Well, Simon Greenway is the country's latest hero. The 19-year-old former RE paramedic helped to save the life of a fellow passenger on a British Airways jet who'd taken an overdose of Valium and vodka. The Express tells how Mr. Greenway made a glucose solution using 22 sachets of sugar from the refreshment trolley and then forced it down the man's mouth. The glucose stopped him from slipping into a coma, and the patient had recovered enough to walk off the plane at Gatwick. Well, finally, back to the election and out on the campaign trail, debate on the real issues is in danger of being overshadowed by a menagerie of party supporters and protesters dressed in furry animal suits, to the delight of picture editors. Well, the chicken employed by the Conservatives to bait Tony Blair was yesterday joined by a medley of other animals. Now, can you believe this? 2 more furry chickens, 2 bears, a fox and a rhinoceros in what the Times described as a pantomime. It all provides prime fodder for the mass cartoon in the Telegraph, which shows 2 women working for the opinion pollsters Gallup. Oh my goodness, says one, there's been a 30-point swing to the chicken.
And now the news. Everest has been conquered. The Titanic begins its maiden voyage. England have won a test match.
Without Radio Norfolk's comprehensive round-the-clock news service, the news would be, rather old.
Norwich says farewell to the tram.
For the most up-to-date coverage of news from around the county, it has to be Radio Norfolk.
And now the weather from the Air Ministry roof.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
Well, the time now is 22 minutes past 7. Good morning if you have just joined the programme. We've got our first sports bulletin of the programme coming up with Sarah Ford in a couple of moments. Before that, from selling patchwork quilts in her back garden, a Norfolk woman is now forging links throughout the world. Julian Webster's exhibitions of quilts have gained such a reputation, she's now about to cover Europe with them. Her quilt fair will shortly be heading for Belgium, so Anne-Marie Parnell went along for a sneak preview.
The patchwork and quilting industry is really very big. There are a lot of shops that specialise now in patchwork and quilting supplies, and we go around the country with quilt fairs. We've been touring Britain this spring with a series of quilts from France, from South Africa and from Australia.
How do you make links with people who have kind of quilters in France who have got interesting quilts for you to show? How does that happen?
And quilting is a wonderful international language, and when you're in the quilt world, you do meet people from other countries with the similar interests.
You're a very experienced quilter. When you see a quilt, Do you immediately recognise where that quilt is from, or are there certain traits that go with quilts from different countries?
Other countries, perhaps you can recognise after a little while a particular style. I mean, for instance, the French are incredibly precise with their quilts. Very, very neat. And it's been really interesting seeing them because they are really very different to what's being made in Britain at the moment.
Do you think things that are happening or traits of different countries affect their quilting? Like, for example, quilts from South Africa might have very wild scenes, or with animals or safari scenes, that kind of thing.
Well, you're right. The quilts from South Africa are particularly exciting. There are a lot of vibrant colours that come out of the South African quilts, and they use plaited fabrics and tassels and things that hang down and little bits of bone attached to the quilt and all sorts of things like that. And you think, how intriguing. Really, it's fascinating to see it.
We're talking about you forging links with other quilters in Europe. It's led to an exhibition that you're going to put on in Bruges in April.
Yes, we're going to Bruges with the current series that we're touring with the South African quilts and the quilts from Scotland and France.
Now, if people can't get over to Bruges to see the exhibition, where can they see it more locally?
We'll be at Chilford Vineyard at Linton near Cambridge. It's just off the A11 this weekend from Friday the 4th to Sunday the 6th of April.
That was Anne-Marie Parnell talking to Juliet Webster, and if you want to see the quilt exhibition, then as Juliet says, it'll be at Chilford Vineyard at Linton near Cambridge this weekend. Oh, it makes me want to go back to bed again listening to that.
Sports news from the talk of the county.
And here's Sarah Ford.
The full extent of Norwich City striker Keith O'Neill's injury, picked up whilst playing for the Republic of Ireland on Wednesday, will be revealed today. The young Canaries star returns to Coney this morning amid tentative reports from the island camp that he'd aggravated his ankle injury in their defeat in Macedonia. If the news all Canary fans dreaded is confirmed, City boss Mike Walker could be without O'Neill for 3 weeks, a huge blow to their promotion-chasing run-in. Distown moved up into 4th in the Jewson Premier last night. The Tangerines won 2-1 at Watton through first-half goals from Glenn Sharp and Stuart Jopling. At a windy Watton, the home team rallied in the second half and David Kingshot pulled a goal back for them with 4 minutes to go. Their manager Dominic McCallum enjoyed his team's second-half performance.
Game of two halves, basically. We were the better side by far in the second half. In the first half, we didn't get much to run the ball, but they're a fair, strong side, this. But I do believe that we deserve something out of it tonight. We were very unlucky, and sometimes the run goes against you when you're down the bottom of the league, and it stays where you're in the top of the league. And tonight it didn't run for us.
Dis assistant coach Paul Tong was impressed with his side's commitment.
I thought the first half we worked very hard, and you know we could have come in 3 or 4 up. And should have come in 3 or 4 up. We had 2 or 3 good chances and didn't put them away. But credit to the lads, second half. The wind was very strong. They defended very well. John McNary outstanding at the back. Johnny Hardcastle sweeping. And, the whole team worked hard.
Elsewhere, Fakenham and Great Yarmouth shared the points. Ricky Martin gave the Bloaters the lead in the 66th minute, but a last-gasp strike from substitute Ollie Christie nicked a point for Fakenham. A wrist injury has forced British golfer Sam Torrance to withdraw from the Freeport McDermott tournament, which began in New Orleans overnight. Defending champion Scott McCarron shares the lead with 2 other players after the opening round. Great Britain begin their Davis Cup tie against Zimbabwe at Crystal Palace today. They open with the 2 singles rubbers with Andrew Richardson, who plays Byron Black, and Jamie Delgado, who takes on Wayne Black, replacing the injured Tim Henman and Greg Ruzetsky. Despite the loss of his 2 top players, Britain's non-playing captain David Lloyd is still optimistic.
I suppose if you look on paper, Byron Black will win 2 singles, but I'm not really sure that will happen. But therefore the doubles is the most important tie. Both my players are ranked higher than Wayne Black, so in theory you are talking about the match being the doubles, but who knows. But Petchy has played well for me. He's never lost a doubles match for me, and Neil Broad has done very well, hasn't he? He's done well recently and is silver medalist, so no. the whole match is going to be vital, and it's going to be tremendous, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these young kids perform. I really am.
The semi-final lineup at the British Open Snooker Championship taking place in Plymouth features world champions Stephen Hendry, Peter Ebdon, Mark Williams and Steve Davis. And in cricket, the fourth test match between the West Indies and India starts in Antigua later today. The West Indies lead the series 1-0 after their unexpected win in the third test in Barbados earlier this week. And finally, the build-up to tomorrow's Grand National continues at Aintree today. There's also racing at Sedgefield and Lingfield Park. But the Galloper goes in the 3:10 at Aintree, and it's number 5, Chopwell Curtains. Radio Norfolk Sport, I'm Sarah Ford.
Sarah Ford, where do you get your names from for your horses?
It's a top horse.
Is it a serious name?
Yes, well, I think so.
How on earth do they call it something like that?
No idea.
I don't know. I think it would probably best left, isn't it? Let's not pry too further into that one.
Traffic and travel from BBC Radio Norfolk.
Well, no particular problems on the roads this morning to tell you about, but there are a series of ongoing roadworks. In Cossey, lane closures on the A1074 between Gurney Road and Marlpit Lane continue to cause delays at peak hours. There are three-way lights working at the junction of the A149 and the B1145 in North Walsham. Between Bridge Street and Whitehall Street in Fakenham, the B1146 is controlled by traffic lights, so do be prepared for some delays there. Around the county, lights can be found in Hemsby Road and on Winterton-on-Sea and on the Downham Road in Nordelf. A single-file bridge with a 24-hour light still operating on the A1064 Akelway crossing, but drainage work is nearing completion on Wood Road Norton Road in Stibbart. No problems reported to us on public transport this morning. Our next travel update in half an hour.
Keeping the county moving. BBC Radio Norfolk.
You're listening to Today in Norfolk. It's now 7:30. The latest news headlines from Ian Himes.
A Norfolk man is in hospital after being viciously attacked in an armed raid on his home. Two masked men armed with a gun raided the house at Lodge Farm, Dereham Road at Cossey, on the outskirts of Norwich at 10 o'clock last night. The man was beaten up in front of his family and cash and jewellery was stolen in the raid. West Midlands Police say stretches of the M5 and M6, which were sealed off after the security alerts yesterday, will remain closed until after the morning rush hour at the earliest. 2 bombs were discovered on the M6. Anti-terrorism officers have been searching for other devices. Caister Lifeboat has been launched to help a yacht which has run into difficulties. The 33-foot Anna Matilda with 3 people on board was heading towards Hull when it had to tackle gale force winds. The smell of aviation fuel and the noise of nighttime flying is causing major concern for people in the north of Norwich. Broadland residents say the only way forward is for officials to start observing long-standing airport regulations. A Norwich man who admitted to smuggling drugs into Norwich prison has been ordered to be tagged by a judge at Norwich Crown Court. 28-year-old Stephen Mullen from Drayton has been confined to his home for 8 hours a day to coincide with his shift work at a local factory. The Liberal Democrats will set out their election stall today when they publish their manifesto. At its core will be education, with a promise to put a penny on income tax to pay for extra spending on school books and equipment. And finally, the public will today get their first chance to see plans for the transformation of Kings Lynn's Vancouver shopping centre. The multi-million-pound project would involve the demolition of many existing shops built 2 decades ago. The scheme's aim is to prevent West Norfolk shoppers defecting to Norwich and Peterborough. That's the BBC Radio Norfolk News Summary at 7:32. The next news for you at 8 o'clock.
And if you'd like to hear more about what's going to be happening in Kings Lynn, we'll have a full report coming up on that in the programme after the 8 o'clock news. Well, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Isolated showers in northeast Norfolk will soon clear, otherwise generally dry with some sunshine. It'll turn cloudy during the afternoon. Today's maximum temperature 11 degrees Celsius and moderate northwest winds easing this afternoon.
BBC Radio Norfolk, the talk of the county.
Well, good morning to you if you've just joined the programme. It's Today in Norfolk with Stephen Lee between now and 9. Coming up in the programme in the next half an hour, the end of the pier in Cromer sees the start of a new era, how a local firm is throwing a net around bad debtors and fraudsters, and people living near a local airport say they've had enough of noise and smell. Well, the Pavilion Theatre at Cromer, the home of the famous End of the Pier show, will soon have a new manager. It follows the sudden resignation last week of Nigel Stewart. It'll bring the theatre under direct council control for the first time in 18 years. The Chief Executive of North Norfolk Council, Bruce Barrell, told Jill Bennett what had happened.
Clearly, it has put us in a position where we've had to get many actions in place very quickly. We're now only a week or so away from the beginning of the amateur season, and we're also finalising all the arrangements for the main summer season at the pier.
So you're under some pressure to find a replacement, really?
No, I wouldn't say that, because it's important that we get the right replacement. What we've done is made temporary arrangements using our own staff to ensure continuity and to ensure that there isn't any difficulty surrounding the commencement of the new season.
Well, what is there to be done then at this time? Is it just pulling together arrangements and so on?
In a way it is, but you've got to realise that when you've had a contracted manager in the past, all the staff and all the performers at the theatre have contracts with that manager. And what we've now had to do, of course, is to convert all those contracts to ones with the district council. So there's quite a lot of detailed work that has to go on there. We've got to ensure continuity of advertising and ensure that the whole of the season is in place and secure with us as the main contractor in future.
Could it jeopardise any part of the season as far as you're concerned?
No, we're adamant that that isn't going to happen, and we now, a week on from the resignation, know enough to be sure that the whole of the season is secure.
So how will you go about recruiting a replacement?
In the traditional way now, an advertisement will be placed in the regular magazines that are appropriate for the manager of a theatre, and from that point on we'll be inviting applications and we'll go through a formal interview process, and we're looking to create a permanent manager's position that will be employed directly by the district council in future.
So that will be the first time that this theatre has been directly managed by the district council?
Certainly in the time that I'm able to remember, and certainly in the time that we've had the End of the Pier show in the way that it's currently run, and that's been for the last 18 years.
And that was started by Dick Condon taking the contract originally?
Yes, he was the person that really put the theatre and the pier show on the map.
That was Bruce Barrell, the Chief Executive of North Norfolk District Council, talking there to Jill Bennett about the plans for a new manager for the Pavilion Theatre at Cromer. The time now is 25 minutes to 8.
Weekends on Radio Norfolk mean music. Country music with Roy Waller on Saturday morning.
Because you're mine, I walk the line.
The Paul Barnes programme on Saturday and Sunday evenings. And Radio Times with John Taylor at Sunday tea time.
Stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas.
Music at the weekend on Radio Norfolk.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
Now, medical teams at racecourses around the country, including Great Yarmouth, have been criticised recently over the way they deal with the problem of jockey falls. The issue has come to the fore after Tony McCoy's fall on Saturday at Uttoxeter and the following confusion over when he should get back into the saddle. The Jockey Club stepped in to correct the original decision that McCoy could be back racing within a few days. Adam Brimley reports.
What do you want now? 450's Hancock. Hancock, 450, ticket 25. Thank you. 20 and
Betting is brisk on the 3:35 here at Uttoxeter. The spring sunshines brought punters out in strength, clutching race cards and cash in the long queues to the betting booths. But even as they size up the runners and riders, the talk in the stands is of Tony McCoy. Injured here 2 weeks ago, stood down for 10 days by the course doctor, and then ruled out for Aintree after the Jockey Club intervened, saying the suspension should have been for 3 weeks because he was unconscious for more than a minute. The betting public is bemused.
I think he should ride. If he thinks he's fit enough, he should ride. It should be up to the jockey.
Yeah, but also bear in mind that they did actually say they passed him fit at the time.
Yeah.
So therefore I don't see how they can reverse the decision afterwards.
Well, now the runners are about to step onto the track.
The confusions cast a shadow over the run-up to Saturday's race. And it's not just Uttoxeter. Medical teams have been criticised over their response to falls at Kempton, Yarmouth and Warwick. And the worst case was at Southall last year, where the jockey Richard Davis was fatally injured, but had to wait nearly half an hour for an ambulance. His agent, David Roberts, also represents Tony McCoy. He says someone must be called to account for the latest mix-up.
If a jockey or a trainer or even an owner makes a mistake, they are punished quite severely, which might be a ban or suspension or a fine. I feel on this occasion that a member of the jockey club or employed by the jockey club has made a serious mistake, and at this moment in time there has been no action taken.
A call, Dr. Brady, would Dr. Brady kindly call at the ambulance room as soon as possible.
An inquiry is underway at Uttoxeter, but course officials insist the problem, one of the doctors not knowing the rules, won't happen again. But the Jockey Club admits some doctors only come to the races once or twice a year, so it's not surprising that mistakes are made. And it's hard to supervise them because they're not answerable to the Jockey Club, but to the racecourses which employ them. The Jockey Club's medical advisor, Dr. Michael Turner, accepts changes are necessary.
And we have a professional sport. We have professional jockeys, trainers are professionals, everybody has a licence, and it's inevitable that therefore we would look at the way in which medical provisions are provided as to whether they should be done on a more structured format or whether there should be structured training for doctors.
But these changes cost money, and not everyone in racing wants doctors having a bigger say in the sport.
Comes the greatest horse of Aintree. Red Rum has 200 yards to run.
Red Rum's trainer, Ginger McCain, thinks too many medical rules are getting in the way of jockeys who want to get on with their jobs.
When you're involved in the type of sport that national hunt racing is, or racing is, I think these doctors, half of them, they should go and sort of, run a woman's meeting or something like that. This is a man's sport for men, and men get knocked about in it. But all this McCoy being laid off for as long as he is, I think is stone cold. Well, it's ludicrous. I can't say any more than that. All right.
But in the weighing room at Uttoxeter, most jockeys want clear medical procedures that doctors understand.
Coming to the last.
In terms of fatalities, racing is the most dangerous sport in the country, with 9 deaths in the last 12 years. The Jockey Club says it's determined to ensure riders have complete confidence in the medical services. The recent confusion at Uttoxeter has underlined the need to come up with a solution quickly to protect the good name of racing.
Alan Brimley reporting now on how medical teams deal with the problem of jockey falls. Well, it's now 20 to 8. You're listening to Today in Norfolk on BBC Radio Norfolk. All still to come this morning, we're going to be talking business in a few minutes' time, our regular look at business with Jim Moult from KPMG. And also after that, we're going to be talking about aircraft noise and the problems of living under a flight path. First, though, a Norfolk investigation company has come up with an alternative to hidden cameras and secret microphones in the form of the personal computer. Well, the Sapphire Bureau in Long Stratton is now using email and the internet to help find bad debtors, fraudsters and missing persons all over the world. Graham Barnard's been to do some sleuthing of his own.
Good afternoon, Sapphire. Yes, it is. How can we help? So you're trying to trace your long-lost brother, you say? And he emigrated to Australia?
Paul Peachman, your Director of Sapphire Investigations, are called to trace a long-lost relative.
That's right, yes. Basically, now that we'll just look up in one of our directories, normally the Association of British Investigators publish a directory, I'll look up, find an Australian agent, get their internet email details off there, and I'll get an email straight off to them.
For something like that, then, you just use email. Is there any other way that you're using the World Wide Web?
Oh, sure. There is a large number of investigators now on the internet, primarily, albeit still in America, and we swap tips and information on how we can go about fulfilling our assignments. And we also, if we're looking for somebody, we can also put it out there, has anybody seen this man, a sort of modern-day wanted poster.
And you also have an internet site?
That's correct. We actually have one on the UK legal site, which is the main site in this country for solicitors, barristers, investigators and generally members of the legal profession. And on this page it basically explains that our company has been incorporated since 1963, the services that we can offer and any way that we can help people.
Mark Peachman, you're also a director of this company. How else do you use the internet in tackling your investigations?
Right, well, a typical sort of inquiry, we may be asked to conduct background inquiries on somebody who originates from, say, somewhere in America. We can access various newspaper reports originating from America to see if that gentleman, person, company or whatever has appeared in the newspapers in time, and it all helps to obtain some background information.
What about this person in Australia we're trying to find then?
Well, we can check their equivalent of voters' rolls, we can check telephone entries, and through those directions you can hopefully possibly obtain some sort of lead, if not trace him.
Paul, do you think now that you are on the World Wide Web and using it, that that'll be the way forward for your company?
Undoubtedly, we have one client who insists on only communicating via email. They have a totally paperless office, so everything is board on computer. The web is just the way forward. It isn't growing at such a rate. I've read recently that there's somewhere in the region of 16 billion pages of information on there, which equivalent Encyclopedia Britannica is just dwarfed. And in fact, in the last few minutes since we've been talking, we've received an email back from our Australian agent saying that they have received the case and they're getting on with it.
So the power of the web could reunite this family before too long?
We hope so.
That's Paul Peachman of the Sapphire Investigation Bureau giving Graham Barnard some tricks of the trade. The Long Stratton Bureau now using email and the internet to help find bad debtors, fraudsters and, well, missing people all over the world using the power of the computer. Well, incidentally, Radio Norfolk has its own niche on the internet as well. We're not one to be left out, so if you want to email us, we have our own address, and that's norfolk@bbc.co.uk. So if you want to drop us a line on email, you're more than welcome. That's norfolk@bbc.co.uk.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
Well, let's take a look at the latest news headlines this morning. Norfolk police hunt two masked gunmen who attacked a man at his home on the outskirts of Norwich. He's now in hospital with serious injuries. Cash and jewellery were stolen in the raid. Stretches of the M5 and M6 will remain closed until after the morning rush hour, following the discovery of two bombs yesterday. Police are now searching for possible other devices. Caister Lifeboat came to the rescue of a yacht with 3 people on board, which tackled gale-force winds off Great Yarmouth during the night. And the 2 missing Kings Lynn girls have been found safe and well. They disappeared on Wednesday and caused a big police search. The weather forecast: isolated showers in northeast Norfolk will soon clear today, otherwise generally dry with some sunshine, and today's top temperature 11 degrees Celsius. Full details on those stories and the rest of this morning's news coming up at 8 o'clock, our next news bulletin, and that's with Ian Himes. Well, the time now is exactly 7:45. It's time to take a look at business, and well, if you listened to the news earlier, you'll have heard that all kinds of changes to the tax and pension rules come into effect this weekend, and details are also emerging on how our savings might be affected by any new government. Joining us now for our daily look at business is Jim Moult from KPMG in Norwich. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Stephen.
Now, it's the end of the tax year tomorrow, isn't it? What's in store for us?
Yes, last working day today, so we're all flat out doing the last-minute planning and things. Next week's sees the beginning of the new tax year, and 2 of the most far-reaching changes to the financial world seen in recent years. I suppose the one that's caught all the headlines is the change of the tax system to self-assessment. We've heard warnings this morning from the Institute of Chartered Accountants about people receiving bad advice and so on. No surprise there. The other major one, which hasn't got so much publicity but is nevertheless extremely important, and in fact it affects millions and millions of people, are the new regulations which come into effect for protecting pension holders, employees who are expecting pensions when they retire from another scandal like the one that affected the Mirror Group with the Maxwell business. Most of the measures in the Pensions Act 95 are due to come into effect next week. It's been with us a long time, and the run-up has enabled us to advise schemes on how best to cope with the new rules. Most of them are, as I say, about the protection. There are two rules which are not purely about protection. One is the one which will increase the state pension age for women in stages up to 60, until it is 65 level with men, and the other one is on divorce. But on the protection side, it introduces a new regulatory authority which has some real powers against trustees and employers who don't toe the line. rules for setting out the composition of trustee boards, trustee obligations, and in particular rules to ensure that there's always enough cash in the kitty to pay the pensions that are promised.
So this is something we should all be taking, a very close interest in.
Well, yes, I mean, it's so boring to most people that, that they aren't going to sit down with the Pensions Act 1995, obviously, but I think schemes will, over the next few months, be putting out sort of summaries for their members, the changes that are being made and so on, and it is quite reassuring, really.
All in baby language, I hope, so we can all understand
I
it.
hope not.
Now, the manifestos to date are revealing possible changes for investors and savers. I'm sure there's been a lot in the manifestos for business, of course, but what's this about?
Yeah, well, we've been beavering away, sort of looking at these manifestos, see what they mean, particular for investors and savers. We've seen 2 so far. We've got 1 to come, of course, because we haven't seen the Lib Dem one as it comes out today. The ones that we have seen, the Tories, of course, can take credit and do, obviously, for introducing PEPs and TESAs, whilst Labour promises, quite an interesting thing here, new individual savings account and to extend the principles of PEPs and TESAs to promote long-term savings. That's quite encouraging because, people have been worried and they've been scuttling around in the last few days thinking, shall I do a PEP before the election and so on, So there's seems to be a good commitment there. And also Labour say they promise to review the capital gains tax regime to prevent it from penalising people who are prudent and put money away for the long term. Mm-hmm. Tories, on the other hand, come with promises on pension reforms to make it easier for people to take their benefits when they retire, and a new scheme to encourage employee share ownership. So there's quite a lot in the manifestos for savers and investors.
Now, how about interest rates?
Very clear indication again last night that Eddie George will want to see quite a move towards higher interest rates after the election. The first meeting between the Chancellor, whoever that will be, and the Governor of the Bank of England is scheduled for just 1 week after polling day. And the papers are speculating this morning that if it's Gordon Brown, he won't be experienced enough to stand up to Eddie, whereas if it's Ken Clarke, he'll no longer have the incentive to bother about whether interest rates are high or low. So I think we're in for a rise, one way or t'other.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for coming in and giving us the business news. I'll let you go back to the office and, I'm sure
tidy up.
A busy day.
Yes,
okay, thanks very much indeed. That's Jim Malt from KPMG with our business news this morning.
The Radio Norfolk Action Desk is here to help you. Advice and information is just a phone call away.
Radio Norfolk Action Desk.
If you need volunteers to help your charity, call us. If you have a problem with something you've bought, call us. Or if you're all tied up in official red tape, call us.
Radio Norfolk Action Desk.
The Radio Norfolk Action Desk. Community action on the talk of the county. Office hours on Norwich 631 631.
Well, let's stay with an election theme, but move away from the general election and towards the county council elections, because the nominations for the county council elections close at midday today, ready for polling on May the 1st, the same day as the general election. Norfolk County Council hasn't had any one party in overall control for the last 4 years. This election is overshadowed by the general election, of course, but will it have an immediate effect on life in Norfolk? Well, joining us now on the telephone is John Greenaway, who's the lecturer in politics at the University of East Anglia. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Now, how will having 2 elections on the same day work? Is that very feasible?
Yes, it actually happened in 1979. I think for the voters it'll be quite easy. They'll just get handed two different ballot papers, the normal one for the general election, and what I understand will be a tastefully sort of pale lilac ballot paper for the county council elections, and then they'll go away into their booths, and then there'll be 2 different boxes in which they'll put them. I think probably one should spare a thought for the returning officers and the counters, because they're going to have to count sort of 2 lots of elections after the polls finish. Now, I think what will happen is they'll count the general election that night, and then they've got to sort of turn up again probably the next day sometime to count the county results. So we'll have results of elections coming right the way through Friday.
I'm sure it goes without saying as well that having 2 elections on the same day is going to increase the turnout.
Yes, that's certainly the case. You see some of the local government turnouts are really abysmal, down to sort of 30% in poor wards. And I think one of the interesting things will be, will that have an effect upon the result? If the turnout is high, will that actually affect the the county results, and that's something I think we'll be looking for, really.
Now, I remember someone saying a while back that, of course, the county council is hung at the moment, and one of the reasons it was hung was because of the turnout at county council elections before. But so do you think then that, we could see one party in overall control if more people are going along to vote?
Well, I think probably not, actually, because both Labour and Liberal Democrats did very well. You've got to remember when these elections were last fought, which was back in '93, which was a very bad year for the Conservatives. So I can't really see Labour or the Liberal Democrats winning the council outright. So possibly, the Conservative vote might be boosted, but on the other hand, their standing in the national polls is still quite bad. So I would expect it to actually continue as it is. I think it's quite interesting, the Liberal Democrat position. I think that they could be that's going to be rather interesting to look at, because they're very strong in local government. They get a much higher vote in the county councils than they do in the national parliamentary votes. And the problem is that they're going to be pulled two ways, I think, because there's certain, it may be that certain seats they'll want to concentrate on in Norfolk in the national won't correspond necessarily to the local wards. So I think it was perhaps a deliberate choice of the Prime Minister to actually choose the election for May the 1st, which would coincide with the county election. So it would try and sort of pull the Liberal Democrats two different ways.
Now, why is it that people vote differently in general elections and local elections?
Yes, I think what tends to happen is they tend to vote as a protest vote in local elections, for one thing. And the local elections are normally sort of held in mid-term, so that's one reason. The other thing is, I think, on the Liberal Democrats, because that's the really big difference. The Liberal Democrats do a lot better, and also you sometimes get small parties, Greens and others, in pockets doing well. So what happens is that there, I think, local campaigns and local candidates can make an issue in particular seats. It's easy to target seats. Now, but having said that, generally speaking, people tend to vote on national issues. So you don't tend to get enormous amount of variation, from one part of the county to another.
Now, how confusing, do you think that will be for voters, with issues blurred between Westminster and County Hall?
As I say, I think really it won't be that confusing because people do tend to vote on national issues. For example, if we go back to the 1982 elections, quite a long way ago, there was a big surge in Conservative support simply because of the Falklands War there, which had nothing whatsoever to do with Norfolk district elections in Norfolk. And in a way, this sort of blurring of confusion in people's minds is quite sensible in a way, because I'm afraid the fact is that local government doesn't have the powers which it perhaps should have. Really, it's really heavily constrained by national policies.
Well, Mr. Greenway, thank you very much. We shall soon find out, won't we, in a few weeks' time, how will this all pan out, see if the speculation is correct. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's Miss John Greenaway, who's the lecturer in politics at the University of East Anglia.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
And the time is exactly 5 minutes to 8. Well, the problems of living under a flight path have been the subject of a public meeting in Norwich. Angry residents of the city's northern suburbs say they're fed up with the odour of aviation fuel and nighttime aircraft noise. The Broadland Environmental Forum gave people the chance to air their grievances with environmental agencies and with Broadland residents opposed to airport disturbances. Naomi Balcombe, the spokesperson for Broads, told Graham Barnard what she felt the meeting had achieved.
From my own point of view, I've received an awful lot of information from the Aviation Federation in London. We've been in telephone contact for the last 18 months, but to meet Tim face to face and actually find that he's got a whole fund of leaflets which will be useful to us, it's really been invaluable. And to have so many people coming from so many different areas, Frettenham, Catton, Spixworth, etc., it really helps for us to get a full picture of the problems of the different areas. And it just reinforces that it's very important that we keep on doing what we're doing now.
You said at the beginning of the meeting that you weren't opposed to the airport itself. Just what is Broads trying to achieve?
You're quite right. We are not opposed to Norwich Airport. Many of our members use it, both for work, essential work, and for leisure. The main thing is that we believe that planning conditions were placed on the enforcing planning conditions placed on the airport in 1986. We believe that some of those conditions are being breached. We are suffering from night flights during a time when supposedly the terminal facilities are meant to be closed. We are being disturbed by large jet planes flying in, and we're suffering from engine testing at night and other miscellaneous noises from the airport when we believe that the entire vicinity should be silent.
Has Broads actually made contact and been in conversation with the airport itself?
Yes, we've had some valuable meetings with Jeff Newman, base manager of KLM ERA, and with Barry Mortimer, operations manager of Norwich Airport. Steve Parsons would never meet us. We would very much like to meet the new manager who took his position on the 1st of April this year. We have had good reports of him so far, and we hope that there will be a new dialogue.
What is the way forward now for Broads?
Well, we keep calmly and quietly carrying on. We have had an undertaking from Ian Gibson, the prospective Labour MP, that if he obtains a seat in Parliament, he's going to organise a meeting between us and the managing directors of Norwich Airport, which I feel would be useful. So there's a calm exchange of views. As I say, we are not opposed to Norwich Airport. We recognise its economic importance. We would simply like it to abide by the planning regulations which we believe were set in place in 1986.
That's Naomi Balcombe talking to Graham Barnard at the Broadland Environmental Forum, which met last night to discuss the problems of living under a flight path.
Traffic and travel from BBC Radio Norfolk.
Well, in Cossey, lane closures on the A1074 between Gurney Road and Marlpit Lane continue to cause delays at peak hours. There are three-way lights working at the junction of the A149 and the B1145 in North Walsham. Between Bridge Street and Whitehall Street in Fakenham, the B1146 is controlled by traffic lights, so be prepared for delays there. Lights can be found in Hemsby Road, Winterton-on-Sea, and also on the Downham Road in Nordelf. No problems reported to us on public transport this morning. We'll update the travel situation for you in half an hour's time.
Keeping the county moving. BBC Radio Norfolk.
The Morning Mix with Andy Archer and Alison Turpin.
She makes me laugh if we're talking about meat or parts of the body or whatever.
Andy tries to make me giggle as often as possible, but now I know his tricks, I see them coming, and I take a big step sideways. Sometimes.
We're both fascinated by food and drink and art and architecture and books.
We both of us approach a subject in a very similar way, in fact. We usually complement each other in the sorts of questions we want to ask.
We have this sort of sign language. I mean, if we want a disc played, we sort of whirl our fingers around, or if we can't think of anything to say, we sort of shrug our shoulders. Studio semaphore, I suppose.
We're essentially both curious people, and so things are endlessly fascinating to us. We just like a good old chat. We have a good time. It's a great job to have. The 3 hours can really whiz by.
Radio Norfolk's Morning Mix with Alison Turpin and Andy Archer.
We kick off at 9.
And we finish at 12.
Midday, that is.
On 95.1 and 104.4 FM, this is the Talk of the County, BBC Radio Norfolk.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Friday, April the 4th. You're listening to Today in Norfolk with Stephen Lee. The headlines this morning: a Norfolk man is attacked by two hooded gunmen who stole cash and jewellery. Further traffic chaos is expected within the controlled closure of the M6 motorway near the M5. And nighttime flying at Norwich Airport upsets local people who have complained of noise and the smell of aviation fuel. The weather headline this morning: dry and bright, but feeling cool. Well, coming up in the next hour of the programme, the future of Kings Lynn is revealed. Shopping in Kings Lynn coming under the spotlight. All that and more the next hour of the programme. But first, the news is read this morning by Ian Himes.
Good morning. A Norfolk man is in hospital after being attacked in an armed raid on his home. Two masked men armed with a gun raided the house at Lodge Farm, Dearn Road in Cossey on the outskirts of Norwich at 10 o'clock last night. He was beaten up in front of his family and cash and jewellery was stolen, as we heard from Inspector Carol Congreve.
The owner of the property
was attacked by two men who entered the premises wearing balaclavas, and they were armed with a gun. They attacked him and demanded that he hand over money and jewellery this morning, but for the bulk of the day it is going to stay dry. As I say, the best of the sunshine will be during this morning, but we will see some high cloud drifting down from the north, turning the sunshine rather hazy by the end of the morning, and then gradually some thickening layers of cloud will be spreading across during the course of the afternoon. So it probably will be quite a cloudy end to the day, particularly across at Kings Lynn and Downham Market. That cloud will be thick enough to bring some patchy light rain here and there through the course of the evening, and then for tonight I think it will be staying largely dry, some breaks developing in the cloud, but it will be a much milder night than last night, the lowest temperatures around 6 or 7 degrees Celsius, and it will be a breezy night, the southwesterly winds picking up to become quite fresh and blustery. Looking ahead to tomorrow, well, it will be a very windy day, some quite strong westerly winds in store, a fair amount of cloud around, and that may just bring an odd spot of rain later on in the day. Perhaps a ground frost then at the end of Saturday night as winds ease and that rain clears away, and then Sunday at the moment looks as if it should be a much quieter day, dry with some sunshine, but a little bit on the cool side. And now the coastal forecast for the Wash to Great Yarmouth until 7 a.m. tomorrow. The wind northwesterly force 4 or 5, decreasing force 3 or 4 by midday, and southwesterly force 3 by evening. During the evening, winds will increase southwesterly force 5 or 6 with little change overnight. Visibility good but moderate at times tonight. The sea state moderate to rough, decreasing slight to moderate by midday and slight during the afternoon, and then the seas will increase moderate over open waters tonight. And the outlook for the following 24 hours, west-southwest force 6 winds, perhaps reaching force 7 at times, decreasing northerly force 4 overnight, moderate or good visibility, and moderate or rough seas slowly decreasing overnight. And that's the end of the forecast.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
Welcome along to the second hour of the programme. Stephen Lee with you for the latest news, sport, weather and travel between now and 9. Coming up in the programme still to come, we flick through the Liberal Democrat manifesto, the latest to be launched, and we go live to Norfolk Police Headquarters to find out what's happening around the county as we speak. All that's coming up in the next hour. Well, first, today's the chance to see the plans for a £20 million redevelopment of Kings Lynn Main Shopping Centre. An exhibition is being held in Broad Street to unveil the designs to transform 200,000 square feet of shops. Julian Sturdy asked Jamie Andrews from the property managers Threadneedle why such a large-scale redevelopment was needed.
Well, the idea is that the Vancouver Centre is over 30 years old now. The shop units that it provides are very small and dated, and current retailers require far larger units of around about 2,500 feet, and that's what we're hoping to provide in the scheme.
Now, within the next few days, a planning application will be submitted to the council. We've got in front of us a site layout plan which shows a scheme in basically in 3 phases. So let's look at it in 3 sections then. What are you trying to achieve in the first section?
First section is really to flag up that we are creating a new scheme in the town. It will be concentrated at the junction of New Conduit Street and the High Street, and the Broad Street and Norfolk Street junction. That will just involve refacing the existing units with the existing tenants in place. We'll then move into phase 2, which is the rest of New Conduit Street going round to St Dominic's Square, which will be redevelopment of the units, provision of a new anchor store, and then a covered roof area over half of New Conduit Street down to Baxter's Plain.
Now, a lot of people would agree that this is an area that has come in for the most criticism in looking a little bit faded and things. You're actually going to knock these buildings down, aren't you?
Yes, that's right, and the style that we're going to be using is something that will go far better with what's currently in Kings Lynn.
So the total scheme is £20 million, but obviously that's extended over several years. Now, once you've redeveloped the area up to the present Summerfield supermarket, you've got another phase for the rest of Broad Street going upwards towards the Norfolk Street area. This too is going to be covered.
Yes, that's right. That will be covered effectively from St Dominic's Square up to the old Sunway flyover, which will be brought in with a glazed, covered scheme. Those units will be open for Christmas trading in 2001,
Now, this is the plan on a design, but if we just walk over to the other side of the exhibition, I've also got with me the architect, Ken Pipe. Now, you've drawn up some designs of the sort of look that's going to be here in this shopping centre. What have you tried to achieve?
Well, we've tried to recreate parts of the site as they might have looked in times past. More of a traditional feel, bringing back more life, if you will, to the upper levels, bringing back buildings of traditional scale and character to King's Lynn, and putting more emphasis on features like the one we have here, the High Street near Conduit Street Junction, where we've created there a landmark feature to start the move into the new scheme.
Now, the shops that are going to be knocked down in the new Conduit Street area are looking faded, as we said earlier. Do you think this sort of design will last longer than the much criticised area we've got out there at the moment?
Oh, I'm sure it will. Most high streets in most towns in the country, you refurbish the shops, you don't refurbish the street. You're essentially creating a framework which is going to be timeless to a much better degree than certainly the present scheme is.
Are you already talking to some of the people you're hoping to get into this shopping centre?
Yes, we've had opening discussions with a number of major retailers, particularly for the anchor store, and following the presentations over these next couple of days, we'll be going to make formal presentations to more, well, we're particularly looking to attract retailers that aren't in King's Lynn at the moment and are perhaps represented in Norwich and Peterborough and Cambridge.
But will there be an element of those that are here out in that high street remaining in this area?
Absolutely, and for much of the time we'll be continuing to trade whilst we're carrying out our refurbishment works.
That's Jamie Andrews from the property managers behind plans to redevelop the Vancouver Centre in King's Lynn. It's not yet been decided, incidentally, whether the seafaring name will be kept or not. And if you'd like to take an interest in what's happening, and I'm sure if you shop in King's Lynn you will, the exhibition opens in Broad Street at 9:30 and runs today and tomorrow. So that's the exhibition in Broad Street opening at 9:30 this morning. Well, the time now, exactly 8:15. You're listening to Today in Norfolk. Well, if you're listening earlier in the programme, you'll have heard a lot about the Labour manifesto, but it's another day and it's another election manifesto. This time it's the turn of the Liberal Democrats, and Paddy Ashdown says this one's going to be different. From Westminster, Kate Ironside reports.
The Liberal Democrats put great value on honesty. All week they've been deploring what they called the auction of fantasy conducted by Conservatives and Labour as the two larger parties vie frantically for public approval. This morning the Lib Dems say they'll be giving it to the voters straight. Their deputy leader, Alan Beef.
The manifesto will show that if you really want to make a difference with the outcome of this election, you need to vote for people who are committed to putting resources into education, to improving our health service, to getting policemen on the beat, to ensuring that we reform our constitution so that we have a modern, effective and fair system of government. Nobody else has such a comprehensive platform of things that will be changed, and nobody else is telling you where the money is coming from to do it.
The Liberal Democrats would raise the basic rate of income tax by a penny to invest in schools and increase the top rate to 50% for all those earning more than $100,000 a year. There would be more money for the NHS and a new approach to young offenders. The response to all this from Labour and the Tories is somewhat scathing. Alan Duncan of the Conservative campaign team.
They are to a large extent Labour's B team because they are a left-wing party. They would put up taxes, they would sell out a lot of our rights to Europe, and they have already been in cahoots with the Labour Party to try and stick together an agreement on constitutional reform.
Certainly there is common ground between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. They have cooperated to an unprecedented degree over constitutional change, and both parties favour a minimum wage and the European Social Chapter. Yet Labour's Glenda Jackson bristles at suggestions that the Liberal Democrats pack an equal punch to Tony Blair's new Party of the People.
There are only two parties in this country who can actually command sufficient support to be able to create a government. That is the Conservative and Labour.
Nor is she impressed by the Lib Dems' pledge to plough more than £1 billion into education, largesse that far outstrips Labour's own offer.
They can say anything they like because they know they are not actually going to be in government. They are not actually going to have to deliver on what they are saying.
The Conservatives are equally resentful of the Lib Dems' flagship policy on schools. Alan Duncan again.
They've just singled out this one issue to try and get votes, but actually the arithmetic doesn't stack up. They would have to put up taxes even further to meet the spending commitments they are promising. So this is actually not an honest policy.
But Allenbeath remains unruffled. He says the voters will back a tax rise if they know it's going on education.
A lot of people would say as their highest priority that they want decent schools for their children, that they want to know that there are enough nurses and hospitals in the wards. And if they know that their money is going to be spent on that, and that's what we're guaranteeing, then they're prepared to see it happen.
But there's the crunch. Will it happen? The greatest challenge for the Lib Dems is to stop Tony Blair's New Labour from scooping up all those disaffected Tory voters whose support Paddy Ashdown is depending upon to transform his small band of MPs into a formidable parliamentary force on May the 2nd.
Kate Ironside reporting from Westminster on the launch of the latest election manifesto. This time it's the turn of the Liberal Democrats.
BBC Radio Norfolk, the talk of the county.
Now, teachers from all over Britain will be listening with interest today at the NASUWT conference when a Norfolk delegate questions Gillian Shepherd's judgment over nursery vouchers. It's the final day of the conference and the Education and Employment Secretary has agreed to take 5 questions from the floor. The union's executive member for Norfolk, Brian Robinson, joins us now on the telephone. Good morning, Mr. Robinson. Now, Mr. Shepherd is going to be questioned by the Norfolk delegate, Simon Whitney, today. Now, what's he going to put to her, do you think? Good morning, Mr. Robinson.
Good morning.
Oh, yes, so Mr. Shepherd is going to be questioned today by the Norfolk delegate, Simon Whitney. What's he going to put to her, do you think?
Well, he's asking her a question about the validity of her statement on the success of the voucher pilot scheme in Norfolk. Because as far as we can see, what she is saying is perhaps stretching the truth a little. That there has not been an increase in the number of places available or an increase in parental choice. Indeed, with the closure of what is a significant number of nursery schools and playgroups, we are seeing a contraction in some rural areas of the county of the places on offer. And we would like her to explain this to us.
Now, feelings running high amongst many Norfolk teachers about nursery vouchers because, of course,
Indeed,
we're one
yes.
of the areas where we've been chosen to pilot the scheme. But
Yes.
what about the conference in general? Has that sort of same mood gone through the rest of the conference?
Well, we are, as an association, we are very concerned about the increasing workload, particularly what appears to us to be pointless bureaucratic paper filling that comes between us and the task of teaching the children in front of us. We're also very concerned that the denigration of teachers is destroying morale and reducing the number of people who are seeking entry. So that is one of the themes that run through the conference.
Now, apart from Mr. Shepherd's appearance today, now what else is on the agenda?
For today, we are coming out, or executive is recommending the association to come out in support of political accountability through local education authorities. Indeed, we're asking that the present system be maintained. We were pleased to hear that at least 2 of the political parties would consider restoring the grant-maintained schools to state control in an attempt to cut down on what we feel is pointless competition between schools for pupils and through league tables for a sort of spurious kudos.
I'm sure Mrs. Shepherd will argue when she gets on the platform that competition is the way forward to raise standards.
Yeah, I've noticed that in a number of industries. I mean, it's a wonderful way forward, isn't it, in the rail industry, and the competition introduced by the hospital trusts has been absolutely marvellous in increasing the efficiency of the National Health Service. I'm not impressed by either, and the association actually believes that there is a need for local political accountability to people who are elected and not people who are appointed or who appoint themselves.
Now, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's the last day of the conference, isn't it? What's the most important thing to come out of the week so far, do you think?
Well, I think it is the bringing together of all our thoughts into what could be termed an offer of social partnership to an incoming government. We had a very, very intense debate earlier in the week on our attitude to any government coming in, and the association decided by an overwhelming majority that the time had come for the association to offer to discuss the whole field of education, pay, hours of work, conditions of service, conditions of school buildings, the ways teachers could be held accountable, and the way all this could be brought together to reunify the service and re-enliven the service to deliver a really good education to children, because that's what we want. I mean, we don't enjoy working in the atmosphere in which we're working, as you can see by the number of teachers seeking to leave.
Mr. Robinson, thank you very much for talking to us this morning. That's the NASUWG Executive Member for Norfolk, Brian Robinson, talking to us there on the last day of the Union Conference.
Did you know that every Sunday on Radio Norfolk we leave the choice of music up to you? Hello, this is Wally Webb, your host for what we call Sunday Requests. We get asked for rock and roll.
Deep down in Louisiana, close to New Orleans.
Oh, the runaway train came down the track and she blew.
And the latest pop hits. Whatever you like, all you have to do is ask. Join me, Wally Webb, for Radio Norfolk Sunday Requests this Sunday from 11 a.m.
Well, the time now, 24 minutes past 8. Time now to catch up with the latest developments at Norfolk Police Headquarters as we go live to the Police HQ this time every Friday. We're joined this morning by Mel Lacey. Good morning, Mel.
Good morning, Stephen.
Now, as we heard in the news, there's been a bad attack on a man in his home in Cossey. What's the latest you have on that for us?
Well, absolutely. I make no apologies for repeating this, the details of this robbery, which actually occurred last night at about 10 p.m. Now, the robbery occurred at premises known as Lodge Farm on Dereham Road, Cossey. To put a definite location on that, this is the house that is located just the Norwich side of the Southern Bypass roundabout on the old A47. Now, the robbery occurred when the owner of the property was attacked in the presence of his family by two men armed with a gun. He was severely beaten, and the gentleman is currently in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, where his condition is this morning described as stable.
This sounds a pretty horrible attack, doesn't it, really?
Well, it's absolutely dreadful when you consider it was taking place in front of the family. It's bad enough, the attack itself, but for the family to have to sit there and witness it is absolutely dreadful. Now, there was an unknown quantity of cash and gold jewellery was taken from the property. We only have brief descriptions of the offenders, and they are male. Both were wearing dark clothing and balaclavas. Now, we know that they left the premises in a dark-coloured K-registered car, probably a Ford Escort or similar type car. Now, apparently when the car left the premises, and went on to the old A47, it narrowly avoided a collision with another vehicle which was travelling towards Norwich. So just repeat the time, that was 10 o'clock last night on the old A47. So if you were that person in that car last night and were suddenly confronted with a dark-coloured Ford Escort or similar car, K-Reg, we need to hear from you urgently. We need also to hear from anybody else who may have been in that area last night. Perhaps you're returning from shopping or travelling out of the city. We need to hear from you. It's very, very important. You may have a small piece of information that is vital. So it's 10 o'clock last night at Cossey. If you have anything at all that may help our inquiry, please contact Detective Inspector Tony Deacon at Bethel Street CID, and the number is 01603 768 769.
Obviously, you're very keen to catch them because, you know, these kind of violent robberies are sort of, luckily, few and far between. Sounds pretty awful, but do you think these people could strike again?
Well, it's obviously a carefully planned robbery. These people are very dangerous people. They need catching, they need locking up. So, yes, obviously, these people are probably professional criminals and undoubtedly will strike again somewhere. We need to catch them. We need every little piece of information, anything at all. If you were just driving along that road at about 10 o'clock last night, maybe before 10, when perhaps the two people involved were planning the robbery, or maybe just afterwards, if you were in that area and you may have seen something, however small it may seem to you, please come forward and tell us. It could be very important.
Now, apart from the attack, it was a fairly quiet night in the county last night, I understand.
Absolutely, yes, and still quiet this morning, I'm very pleased to say. All the incidents this morning that are happening include a minor accident, very pleased it's minor, no injury on Gaywood Road at King's Lynn. There could be a little bit of debris from the accident and a wee bit of hold up to the traffic. That's Gaywood Road with Highgate. And later today there will be an abnormal load travelling through the county from the Cambridgeshire border on the A47 all the way along the A47 to Great Yarmouth, but that probably won't be until late morning, early afternoon. Other than that, I'm very pleased to say the county is quite quiet.
Well, Mel, thanks for joining us this morning. I'm sure you'll keep us updated with the latest on that attack, but thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
PC Mel Lacey talking to us there from Norfolk Police Headquarters.
Sports news from the talk of the county.
And here's Sarah Ford.
Norwich City manager Mike Walker will find out today if he'll be able to call on his Republic of Ireland winger Keith O'Neill to help the Canaries win a promotion playoff place. The young Canary star returns to Coney this morning amid tentative reports from the Ireland camp that he'd aggravated his ankle injury in their defeat against Macedonia on Wednesday. If the news all Canaries fans dreaded is confirmed, Norwich could be without O'Neill for 3 weeks, a huge blow to their promotion-chasing run-in. Distown move up into 4th in the Jewson Premier. The Tangerines won 2-1 at Watton through first-half goals from Glenn Sharp and Stuart Jopling. Dis assistant coach Paul Tong was impressed with his side's commitment.
I thought the first half we worked very hard and we could have come in 3 or 4 up and should have come in 3 or 4 up. We had 2 or 3 good chances and didn't put them away. But credit to the lads, second half. The wind was very strong. They defended very well. John McNary outstanding at the back. Johnny Hardcastle sweeping. And, the whole team worked hard.
Watton rallied in the second half and pulled a goal back through David Kingshot in the 86th minute. Their manager, Dominic McCallum, was pleased with his team's second half performance.
Game of 2 halves, basically. We were the better side by far in the second half. In the first half, we didn't get much to run the ball. But they're a fair, strong side, this. But I do believe that we deserve something out of it tonight. We were very unlucky, and sometimes the run goes against you when you're down the bottom of the league, and it stays where you're in the top of the league. And tonight it didn't run for us.
Elsewhere, Fakenham and Great Yarmouth shared the points. Ricky Martin gave the Bloaters the lead in the 66th minute, but a last-gasp strike from substitute Ollie Christie nicked a point for Fakenham. A wrist injury has forced British golfer Sam Torrance to withdraw from the Freeport McDermott tournament, which began in New Orleans overnight. Defending champion Scott McCarron shares the lead with 2 other players after the opening round. Great Britain begin their Davis Cup tie against Zimbabwe at Crystal Palace today. They open with the 2 singles rubbers with Andrew Richardson, who plays Byron Black, and Jamie Delgado, who takes on Wayne Black, replacing the injured Tim Henman and Greg Ruzetsky. Despite the loss of his 2 top players, Britain's non-playing captain David Lloyd is still optimistic.
I suppose if you look on paper, Byron Black will win 2 singles, but I'm not really sure that will happen. But therefore the doubles is the most important tie. Both my players are ranked higher than Wayne Black, so in theory you are talking about the match being the doubles, but who knows. But Petchy has played well for me. He's never lost a doubles match for me. And Neil Broad has done very well, hasn't he? He's done well recently and is silver medalist, so no. The whole match is going to be vital and it's going to be tremendous, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these young kids perform. I really am.
The semi-final lineup at the British Open Snooker Championships taking place in Plymouth features world champion Stephen Hendry, Peter Ebdon, Mark Williams and Steve Davis. And in cricket, the 4th Test match between the West Indies and India starts in Antigua later today. The West Indies lead the series 1-0 after their unexpected win in the 3rd Test in Barbados earlier this week. The build-up to tomorrow's Grand National continues at Aintree today. There's also racing at Sedgefield and Lingfield Park. And today's galloper goes in the 3:10 at Aintree. It's number 5. Chopwell Curtains. Radio Norfolk Sport, I'm Sarah Ford.
Traffic and travel from BBC Radio Norfolk.
No particular problems on the roads this morning to tell you about, but there are the ongoing roadworks around. There are three-way lights working at the junction of the A149 and B1145 in North Walsham. Between Bridge Street and Whitehall Street in Fakenham, the B1146 is controlled by traffic lights, and lights can also be found in Hemsby Road in Winterton-on-Sea and on the Downham Road in Nordelf. But some good news to end on. No problems reported to us on public transport this morning.
Keeping the county moving. BBC Radio Norfolk.
You're listening to Today in Norfolk. It's just after 8:30. The latest news headlines from Ian Himes.
A Norfolk man is recovering in hospital after he was beaten up in front of his family by two masked and armed men. They raided his house at Lodge Farm in Cossey on the outskirts of Norwich last night. Cash and jewellery was taken in the raid. Inspector Tony Deacon is carrying out an investigation.
It was a vicious attack on the gentleman of the house. He was very lucky indeed. Although he did sustain serious injuries, he was beaten about the upper part of the body and the head quite severely. And thankfully he's now in a satisfactory condition at the hospital.
West Midlands Police say stretches of the M5 and M6, which were sealed off after the security alerts yesterday, will remain closed until after the morning rush hour at the earliest. A yacht with 3 people on board is being escorted into Great Yarmouth by Caister lifeboat after it ran into trouble in gale force winds. The Anna Matilda was heading towards Hull but got into difficulties in the high winds and some of the crew were seasick. The Liberal Democrats will set out their election stall today when they publish their manifesto. At its core will be education, with a promise to put a penny on income tax to pay for extra spending on school books and equipment. 2 missing Kingston schoolgirls have turned up safe and well. 14-year-old friends Nicola Brewer and Claire Hastings disappeared on Wednesday, but the police say the girls have now returned home. Well, that's the BBC Radio Norfolk News. It's 8:34. The next news at 9 o'clock.
Well, a mixed bag on the weather forecast today. Isolated showers in northeast Norfolk will soon clear. Otherwise, generally dry with some sunshine. It'll turn cloudy during the afternoon. Maximum temperature today of 11 degrees Celsius and moderate northwest winds easing this afternoon.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
Welcome along to the last half hour of Today in Norfolk with me, Stephen Lee. Coming up before 9, if you'd like something special for your house, we go live to a display of local design talent. Maxwell Betts joins us for our regular Friday look at the weekend of music ahead. But joining me now in the studio is Andy Archer talking about the morning mix.
Good morning, and sitting next to me, of course, is the Reverend Doug Alexander, so I'm going to have to watch what I'm doing this morning. Good morning, Doug. We're going to put on our leathers, first of all, this morning to talk about the London Motorbike Show. Apparently this is the big event of the year when it comes to biking, so we'll be talking with one of the organisers about the event, which is taking place at the London Arena.
Do you have a favourite type of motorbike?
Oh!
Did you have a bike when you were young?
Never.
No?
But my one memory of bicycles, my French master was Mr. Stevens, and he was a tiny man, about 5'3", 5'4", and he had this 1000cc Vincent, a big black motorbike. And to start it, he had to sort of jump up and sort of land on the start. It'd sort of go 3 or 4 feet in the air. Yeah, but that's my one memory of motorbikes. So, yeah.
No, I've never had a motorbike. My mother would never let me. She would be absolutely, scared out of her wits if she thought I was loose on the road with a motorbike.
Anyway, we're talking to Paul Haig about the motorbike show. Dominic Russell-Price of the Waterfront will be in to tell us what's happening at the venue and also looking ahead to some of the gigs which will be taking place there later in the year. Anthony de Vere Summers is a Norwich man. He works at the Norwich Union, and he's written a fascinating book about war and the royal houses of Europe in the 20th century. So we'll be having a look at that and also giving away a copy. What sort of watch are you wearing, Stephen?
One with hands.
Is that one of these Swatch watches or something?
So, yes.
Yeah. Well, we're talking watches with Peter Hawkins, and he'll be at the other end of the telephone, of course, to answer any questions you may have about the history of the type of watch you're wearing, how much it's worth and the like. So join us with Peter after 10. And we round off the programme with Will Giles, one of our gardening team. Will be in his potting shed.
Right.
Very nice one too.
Lots of advice.
Indeed. And Tipping Tim with the Grand National tomorrow. Tipping Tim will be popping in to make one or two suggestions about which horses to follow tomorrow.
I wonder if they'll be organising a sweepstake.
Well, I fancy pink gin.
Oh, do you? And there's no horse, or just...
It's a horse.
I can have a drink before now on the start of the programme. Andy, thank you very much indeed. That's Andy Archie, who's here at 9 o'clock after he sipped on his gin, and that's coming up, as I say, after the 9 o'clock news with the morning mix. Now, it's the great Victorian designer William Morris who said, "Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." And that could be the motto for a group of people who are opening a special exhibition in Norwich today. The Norfolk Furniture Makers Association is having its 23rd exhibition at the Hewitt School in Norwich. And Graham Barnard has gone to the show this morning with the radio car, and he joins us now. So can you hear me, Graham?
I can, Stephen. Hello. There are 16 furniture makers showing here for the next 3 days, and they produce pieces ranging from the ultra-modern to reproduction styles. Joining me are Bill Smith from Ingham near Aylsham and John Barnard, no relation, from Trouse. John, what is the purpose of the exhibition?
The purpose of the exhibition is to show the public all this wonderful furniture we do, and end up with lots of orders.
And on that front, do people still commission furniture these days?
Oh, they certainly do, yes. I mean, we run on really almost nothing but commissions, the whole group. And of course there are many others across the country doing the same. There are a lot of people commissioning furniture all the time.
What is involved in commissioning a piece then?
The customer comes along with a pretty good idea of what they're after: table and chairs, bookcase, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, whatever it is. And then they sit down with one of the furniture makers, having selected usually one, but sometimes more than that, to feed ideas in. And we have to show them what we've done and try to tie what we can make in with what it is that they want, even if they don't know it. So it's very much a guiding principle.
Here's a question for you. What is it that a craftsman has to offer?
Craftsmanship? I think you'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Bill?
I would. And choice of materials, particular materials, paying special care to detail and using the very best materials that they can get.
And, of course, complete originality.
Complete originality, yes.
Yeah.
So is that the advantage you feel that craftsman-produced furniture has over something that people could perhaps buy in a major high street store?
Absolutely. The number of times that we end up with people coming to us because they've been around 6, 7, 8 stores and not found what they want, we simply sit down, draw it for them and make it.
Bill Smith, there are some real showpieces here, some of which I'd like to see in my front room. Can you describe some of them for me?
Well, yes, I can, I think. I hope I can. There's a beautiful bleached elm table, very unusual, with copper inlays that I can see just down there.
Which won a prize.
Which won a prize, yes. And then there's a very beautiful refectory type table, that sort of proportions, with octagonal sectioned legs and interesting low-level reinforcement. It's got checkered inlay. It's very unusual, very beautiful. There's a very delicate cabinet which has a great surprise. When you open the 2 doors in it, you're confronted by a small world with a mirror at the back and columns and a checkered floor. That, again, very surprising. There's a very large round table, very thick top, very graceful, with 3 pointed legs, conical legs. Again, very surprising, the sort of thing you wouldn't find.
3 very large conical legs.
3 very large conical legs. And let me see now.
There's a coffee table made from some old stairs off a beach. Oak coffee table by David Payton.
I've only had a brief look around myself, but there really does seem to be something for all tastes.
Oh, it's amazing, yes. I mean, there's a winged seat, there's a star table by Simon Simpson, there's a triple-arched mirror by Mike Westgate. There must be 40 different styles of chair.
Yes.
So plenty for people to look at if they'd like to come along. Bill Smith, how does this association help craftsmen?
Well, it gives us the feeling of comradeship in an area which is where we have a great deal to share. We have a great deal of common interest in timber, in modes of construction. There's always something to learn from one another. We can share materials, we can share equipment and machinery, yes. And of course we show together under the same umbrella.
Finally, John, how can people find out about local furniture makers if they'd like to get in touch and perhaps commission something?
Well, I suppose they can really get in touch with any of the furniture makers, and we have a list here which people can take away with them. But if all else fails, they'll just have to get hold of me, John Barnard, down at Trouse, because I'm supposed to be the chairman of this thing.
Well, thanks to John Barnard and Bill Smith from the Norfolk Furniture Makers Association. And if you'd like to see the exhibition, I can imagine, Stephen, there'd be plenty to interest you down here. It runs today, tomorrow and Sunday here at the Hewitt School Hall in Norwich and costs just £1 to get in.
Well, you keep your chequebook at home, Graham, because I know what you're like.
Well, I've got my credit card here, but I'm not sure they take them, which is probably just as well.
Don't flex it too much. Graham, thank you very much indeed. That's Graham Barnard reporting there from the Hewitt School in Norwich. The time now is just after 20 to 9. It's time to pause for thought. We're joined in the studio this morning by the Reverend Doug Alexander, a priest in the Lakenham group of parishes in Norwich.
Good morning, Stephen, and good morning to everyone. Walking up the Ipswich Road the other day, I noticed a cyclist with a rear view mirror fixed on his handlebars. I remember thinking, what a brilliant idea, especially in crowded traffic with cars whizzing by on all sides. I suppose I noticed it particularly because he was using it. But I grew a little anxious as I noticed that his eyes were absolutely riveted on this mirror, presumably on something or someone interesting behind him. His attention was so fixed that he started to wobble and wander across the road. Fortunately, he realised in time, and for a change the road was quiet, so no harm was done as he corrected his course. Well, I confess I've done exactly the same in a car, especially on the motorway. I found myself carefully watching the car behind me, only to realise that the one in front has just slowed down or something and I hadn't noticed. Looking back is only useful if it helps us to go forward. In life, the past can be comforting if it contains things in our life which we have achieved or perhaps have even overcome. But it can also be disturbing or worrying. Well, whichever it is, we can't change it, and we need to remember that and look to what is ahead of us. An old friend of mine watched another cyclist craning his neck to see who was being carried out of the ambulance as he passed their local hospital. His attention was so distracted that the bike was all over the place. My friend gave him some sound advice. "Oi," he said, or words to that effect, "if you don't look where you're going, you'll go where you're looking."
That's the Reverend Doug Alexander from the Lakenham group of parishes in Norwich. Our pause for thought this morning.
Greetings, this is Cardboard Shoes Keith Skews. Now, I've got a small confession to make. I love music.
Magic moments.
All types of music. And you can hear me playing a wide selection.
It's time to cross to our studio in Great Yarmouth now, because we're going to have our paper review. We're going to be talking to Maureen Miller from the Dasmagric Young People's Theatre Group. I do hope I've got that right, Maureen. Have I said that right?
Yes, that's quite correct, Stephen.
Good. I don't want to get it wrong. So, what have you spotted in the papers this morning? What about the headlines?
Well, the headlines to begin with, of course, most of them are concerning electionitis, which being covered by every news bulletin there is, I shall leave well alone. I start with the Mail, which says, "Fury at corrupt tycoons, 4 million legal aid." Whilst being more circumspect, the Telegraph comments and concentrates on the court case itself, simply with Bank of Credit and Commerce Institute man found guilty. Then we go to a very serious affair here, which is the Mail says, "Mayhem as IRA bombers target motorways." The Express looks at it from a slightly different standpoint. That, surprisingly, of the racing punter. For here the headlines are, "The IRA won't stop the National." So the horse racing is more important than anything else, it seems. The Mirror concentrates on the chaos caused to traffic in its usual sensational way by declaiming terror jam. And of course, this is a really terrible thing to find bombs on the motorways. The potential loss of life here is absolutely appalling to think about. And the handling of it must be extremely difficult. What a tremendous job the police have done again, and the public services, in order to prevent such disasters and keep us safe. We don't think enough about that, I feel. Then going on to a different kind of headline altogether, which catches the eye in the Telegraph, Gladiators fuel love of violence.
Oh, no, I've seen a bit about this morning, Maurice. This intrigues me.
Yes, it does indeed. It intrigues me too. Apparently, the television programme Blind Date and the Gladiators encourage this growing addiction to real-life violence, says a criminologist. And this man is called Mike Presdy of the University of Sunderland. And he said he thought that shows were more worrying than violent films because they showed real violence and invited the whole family to enjoy it. Mr. Presdy said that Blind Date is cruelty television. People watch it to see people humiliating each other and tearing each other apart emotionally. It's based on emotional cruelty. It's often nasty and shocking and sexually gratuitous, and people love watching others being torn apart, he says.
Well, that's always happened, hasn't it? If you think back to, many, many years ago when people used to go and watch all kinds of manner of violent things happening.
To the original Gladiators, I suppose, really, isn't it?
Indeed.
He says that it makes sex, violence and cruelty more acceptable and enjoyable. I think probably we're seeing more of it and talking more about it these days, but I do think he's got a point in a way, because he says that it removes any moral frame of reference and makes you think, well, you know, people are saying, right, let's enjoy some more violence, which I'm afraid we are living in that kind of climate today, aren't we?
Well, road rage is one of the things that we do see more of these days, and that's on the front of the Times.
That's right, and it declares controversially that road rage is a middle-class crime, whilst The Sun has a piece of similar reporting in which it says a drunken man driving a motorised wheelchair with his wife on his lap tried to run down the cops in Australia. So I think that's a bit of a other end of the spectrum there. But this man talking about road rage is a middle-class crime, he says. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Surrey. And he says that he's examined reports of 100 incidents of road rage from 1993 and found that they were unlike common crimes of violence. Perpetrators and victims tended to be older than in other crimes and to span the social classes and both sexes. It's very worrying, and I think a lot of this all comes from stress, personally. Everyone gets stressed up, and then we go into the rage, don't we?
Well, being a Friday, it's time for the Great Yarmouth Mercury, of course, and I think there are a few things we've picked out from there, aren't there?
Yes, indeed, and as the Caister lifeboat went out again this morning, I was very sad to read a sea story here. The Great Yarmouth International Seafarers Centre is running out of money again and could be forced to close its doors this summer. They've made an application for cash to the National Lottery after it emerged that the centre has little more than £5,000 in its accounts. And the centre, which is run as a charitable trust, costs about £27,000 a year to run. So £5,000 isn't going to go very far. It seems very sad to me that our friend there says that we're just not getting the donations in, and we have just 5,127 to our name. The centre looks after 562 people in the past year, and every time we get someone in, of course, it costs money. They're doing a wonderful job, and I think this is a tragic thing if it has to close. Staying with the Great Yarmouth Mercury, as a theatre director, I of course turn to the entertainment pages, and at the moment I would like to extol the virtues here of the Galston 27th Competitive Festival. And we have a headline here: Youngsters in Hitting the Right Notes. These young musicians and singers showed off their talents before an audience of proud parents and arts enthusiasts, which this year the festival boasted more than 700 entries. I was there for a great part of that, and believe me, I can tell you that they were an amazing 2 weeks, organised with complete precision and efficiency by Paul Miller, no relation to me, by the way. And people, you know, they say they cannot afford theatre tickets these days, so why not go along to the Galston Festival every year, which has now become an institution, and you will receive really high quality music, singing, drama, all for nothing. And if you want to go to a concert at the end of it, then of course it's just £2. Our children, young people were there from Desmagric. We managed to win back the shield, for which I'm truly grateful. And I'd just like to, as Wally Webb said this morning, never miss the chance to give a plug. I would like to just remind people that we are presenting Spring Serenade at the Galston Pavilion Theatre on the 12th of April, which is Saturday, in order to make funds for our next production in May, which is to be Peter Pan. And, of course, that's going to cost us the earth because we are actually flying 4 members of the cast. So
right.
I do hope people will come along to that.
Well, there we go. So a busy time ahead for you then, Maureen.
Indeed.
Well, should we finish on the Yarmouth Mercury? Because
Yes.
we're going to stay with drama, really, aren't we, for a magical end?
We are indeed a different kind of drama, which I've been following in the Mercury. It was the magic moment that farmer Brian Banham had been waiting for. Just weeks after his pregnant mare, Deep Magic, got stuck in a peat dyke off the Acle Strait, she gave birth to a foal called Black Knight. It was a perfect ending to the story that began on a Sunday morning last month when 15 firefighters and a mechanical digger had to come to Deep Magic's rescue. It took more than an hour to drag the 1.25 ton mare to safety on Mr. Barnum's land just outside Great Yarmouth. And the name Black Knight? It was born in a blackout and delivered with the aid of torches. And I think that's a lovely story with which to finish.
Oh, definitely. Maureen, thank you very much indeed for looking at the papers for us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
That's Maureen Miller from the Desmagric Young People's Theatre Group talking to us there from our studios in Great Yarmouth.
This is Today in Norfolk from the BBC.
And it's now 8 minutes to 9. Well, Maxwell Bett's coming up in a few moments' time to tell us what's happening musically in the county this weekend. But before that, Moggies from all over the UK are preparing to battle it out in a bid to find Britain's bravest cat. Dozens are competing for the feline equivalent of the George Cross and Arthur. One of the favourites for the title helped its owners to catch a cat burglar, most appropriately. Simon Hare reports.
Recently, the number of pet cats in Britain actually outgrew the number of dogs. Apparently, there are around 8 million Moggies in our homes throughout Britain, but there's a house in Derby which is home to one very special cat.
Dinner? Yeah.
Misty, the black and white Moggie who lives in Oakwood with her owner Di Poole, is something of a super cat. That was shown when she used up one of her 9 lives just hours after she was born.
She was dumped in Long Eaton Canal by a person unknown, along with 7 brothers and sisters. She was obviously near the top of the bag and with the air pocket, and she survived. Unfortunately, the rest died.
Misty was then picked out at the Cats Protection League by Di's partner Graham, and it didn't take too long for Misty to repay the favour.
Misty came in, dashing in, meowing like mad. Graham thought, what's going on here? So he followed her and she led him to the back bedroom, only to see this chap running over trying to escape over our fence with our brand new lawnmower in his...
Been nominated for those top cat awards, the Arthurs, which have been running for 3 years. One of the sponsors of the event is Your Cat magazine, and its editor, Sue Parslow, says competition is pretty stiff.
We've had an amazing cat who was knocked over in the road by a car, had his leg put together with metal pins and so on, and then decided he quite liked climbing up electric pylons. Apparently the reason he liked doing that was because he got a tingle through the metal in his leg.
Other cats in line for the awards include one Moggie whose owner gives it a table setting every time they have a dinner party. But what will the prize-winning pussy win?
The lucky cat will actually receive a year's supply of cat food. The lucky owner, the overall winner, will take away the coveted golden Arthur trophy plus a cheque for £1,000, which is not to be sniffed at. But there are 12 regional winners' prizes, and that includes a cheque for £200 and a silver Arthur trophy.
But will Misty win the coveted title? Well, let's get it straight from the cat's mouth. Misty, do you think you're going to get your paws on the Arthur? Was that a yes or a no?
Well, let's hope it's a yes, shall we? That's Simon Hare reporting on the feline equivalent of the George Cross and Arthur, which are all those cats battling it out in a bid to find Britain's bravest cat. Well, let's take a look at the coastal forecast now from the Wash to Great Yarmouth, starting off with the high tide times around the county. Kings Lynn's at 16:48, Cromer and Sheringham at 16:54, Galston 19:11, and just over the border in Suffolk, Lowestoft at 20:21. The winds northwest force 4 or 5, decreasing force 4 by midday. Visibility good but moderate at times tonight. The weather at sea, isolated showers east of Cromer at first, but otherwise dry with some morning sunshine. The sea states moderate to rough, decreasing slight to moderate by midday. And the outlook for the following 24 hours, west to southwest force 6 winds, perhaps reaching force 7 at times. The winds will decrease northerly to force 4 overnight, moderate or good visibility. Cloudy on Saturday with some light rain later, and moderate or rough seas slowly decreasing overnight. Well, finally today, an incredible there it may seem, I have Radio Norfolk's music man with me as well because it's Friday again, and he wants us all to go to the Norwich Waterworks this weekend. April the 1st is long past, Maxwell, so I think you better explain.
Well, first of all, Steve, congratulations on avoiding the, water music joke anyway.
So I'd leave it to you.
But no, there is a lovely converted old Edwardian pump house down, it's, Waterworks Road and Hyam Street there. The pump house, of course, has long since ceased to be used to pump the old water up. They've got much more modern methods of doing it, I believe, now. But this old Edwardian pump house has been converted. It's known as a Chamberlain Centre. They've got all sorts of interesting exhibits on show there about how Anglian Water works today. And there's a very, very nice room which seats 70 or 80 people, which is ideal for concerts because it's got an absolutely super acoustic, and I've been there before. So Anglian Water have sort of teamed up with Span, and guess what? We're celebrating another sort of, it's not a yes, it is a centenary of Brahms's death, in actual fact.
Now, you mentioned Span just now, because Louise was talking on Wednesday with Heinz Liebrecht, who organises all of the Span concerts. They don't usually happen in Norwich.
No, that's right. Span is the arts in North Norfolk, but down they've come into Norwich, and we've got this series of concerts. It's already started, actually. It began last night. It's running right the way through with concerts tonight, concert on Saturday, and then 2 events on Sunday, in the morning and in the evening too.
Now, there are some pretty high-powered names in the weekend lineup I've seen.
Oh, my gosh, yes. I mean, the people here could actually be appearing in the Wigmore Hall in London, in actual fact. We're very fortunate in Norwich to have these people. The Beethoven string trio, I'll get it down in a minute, they're down, and they are sort of the backbone of the concert because it's focusing on Brahms's small-scale sort of chamber music stuff. So tonight we've got a piano quartet, and incidentally, the pianist is John York. He's been on the scene ever since he won one of those important international competitions in the 70s, and he'll be playing one of Brahms's lovely rhapsodies on the piano. And then tomorrow, good old local Nigel Cliff, whose international career is burgeoning fast. He's chosen to come and live in Norwich, and it's the old case, the prophet in the old country. We don't quite realise the talent we've got. He's going to be singing Brahms' songs on Saturday night. Then on Sunday, there are more songs in the morning with a lecture all about Brahms, if you're into that. That's at 11 o'clock. And then the final concert on Saturday evening. So this Brahms lineup is it's quite a catch for Norwich, I think.
This is quite a far removed from Brahms, but there's a flamenco guitar event worth a mention as well.
Yeah, you're right. But, talk about passion and art. The old strumming rhythms of the flamenco guitar. Guess what? It's Paco Peña. And he'll not only be playing the guitar, but I shouldn't imagine if he hasn't got a team of dancers and singers with him. Anyway, that's one of these famous one-night stands at the Theatre Royal in Norwich. Catch it on Sunday night.
Maxwell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's Maxwell Betts looking ahead to a weekend of music, and that's just about it for today in Norfolk for Friday the 4th of April, and indeed for this week. Thank you very much for your company since 7 o'clock this morning. We're back on Monday with Louise Priest, sharp at 7 o'clock, but do join me tomorrow on the Saturday stretch if you're up early and about at 6 a.m. for the best start to the weekend. Do stay tuned, because coming up after the news, it's Andy Archer and the Morning Mix from me, Stephen Lee. Have a great weekend.
On 95.1 and 104.4 FM, this is the Talk of the County, BBC Radio Norfolk.
It's 9 o'clock. This is Ian Himes. The chairman of the Community Health Council in Norwich, Mike Tomlinson, is recovering in hospital after he was beaten